The Sayings of Confucius, How One Man Determined the Course of Chinese History. Confucius, the westernized name of Kong Fu-tze, or Master Kong, is the most influential philosopher in all of Chinese history. He grew up in poverty, but through hard work, he worked himself up to a high position in the government of his state, Lu. After a conflict with his superiors, Confucius began wandering from state to state with a small group of disciples, hoping that a ruler would listen to his advice on good government. True to his roots, he took as his disciples both the rich and the poor, including both aristocrats and even the sons of criminals. What makes Confucius special among the sages of his day is that he did not claim to have any special knowledge about the gods. In fact, his students complained that he, quote, did not put forth theories at all. Instead, Confucius presented a simple moral philosophy based on self-reflection, lifelong learning, and the development of virtues, including kindness, ren, wisdom, qi, righteousness, yi, courage, yun, and proper conduct, li. And he continuously put these virtues in practice as a role model for his students. For instance, he allowed his students to criticize him, stating, "I have been fortunate. If I make a mistake, others will be sure to let me know." And he also encouraged the student to take office in government, because the student didn't feel ready for that role. As Confucius claimed, this type of self-reflection would make a good ruler. Confucius's greatest idea was that people should be promoted to government positions, not based on their family ties, but based on merit. And this idea became institutionalized in China during the Han Dynasty, through the introduction of imperial exams to identify men most suitable for government. So, we have a lot to discuss. Let's start. Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. We'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. Go check it out for yourself. Let's start. Confucius was born in the 6th century BC in an era known as the Warring States period. As the name of this period suggests, power was in the hands of dozens of small states that continuously competed through warfare. But interestingly, the misery caused by these wars prompted the development of China's most influential schools of philosophy, each hoping to remedy the situation. Confucius was born in the state Lu. His father had died soon after his birth, and he was raised in poverty by his mother. Although starting out in this lowly position, he slowly worked himself up, first becoming keeper of the granaries and livestock, then a district officer, then minister of works, and finally minister of crime. Unfortunately, we do not have portraits of Confucius from his lifetime. The best we have is this drawing from the 1st or 2nd century BC, from a tomb of the Han Dynasty. And here we have a picture from much later. This is the 8th century AD. Eventually, Confucius left his home state. According to one version of the story, the government of Lu was overthrown by several powerful families. Confucius then exerted considerable effort to return power to the legitimate heir. But these attempts failed and made him some powerful enemies. Another source gives another reason for his departure. Here we read that the neighboring state, Qi, was worried that Lu was becoming too powerful. To prevent this, Qi sabotaged Lu by sending 100 good horses and 80 beautiful dancing girls to the Duke of Lu. The Duke then became obsessed with this gift, and as a result, he did not attend to his official duties and rituals for 3 days. Confucius, fully convinced of the importance of ritual, then became disillusioned with the Duke and resigned from his post voluntarily. In any case, Confucius left Lu, hoping to find other leaders who would listen to his ideas about virtuous government. He wandered from state to state for 12 years with a small group of disciples. But unfortunately, his search was in vain, as he was rejected, we read, by almost 70 different rulers. At the age of 68, Confucius was finally invited back to his home state by the chief minister of Lu. To his delight, several officials treated him as an elderly statesman, we read, and they approached him for advice on various occasions. And the number of his disciples also grew to about 70. In the last year of his life, Confucius was burdened by the loss of both his son and his favorite disciple, Yan Hui. The other disciples wrote about the occasion, "When Yan Hui died, the master wept with uncontrollable emotion. His followers said, 'Master, you've gone too far.' Yet the master said, 'Have I? If not for this man, for whom should I show so much sorrow?' And on this sad note, Confucius died of natural causes in his 70s. Now it's time to study Confucius's teachings. His dialogues with his students were written down in a work called the Analects, also known as the Sayings of Confucius. Let's start with the following. What makes Confucius special among the sages of his time is that he did not claim to have any special metaphysical knowledge about gods, heaven, or the afterlife. In fact, one student complained that he, quote, did not put forth theories at all. We read, "We are allowed to hear Master's views on culture and goodness, but about the way of heaven he will not tell us anything." And this, by the way, didn't mean that Confucius didn't believe in heaven. On the contrary, he was filled with awe when thinking of heaven, but he realized it cannot be adequately described by human beings anyway. He wrote, "Heaven does not speak, yet the 4 seasons run their course by the command of heaven. The 100 creatures, each after its own kind, are born thereby. Heaven does not speak." Confucius also believed that it was just more productive to learn how to live better lives than to speculate about the gods. His student Jilu, for example, quote, asked about how to serve the spirits of the dead and also the gods, but the master replied, "You can't even serve men properly. How can you serve the spirits?" Now let's turn to the opening line of the Analects. It immediately reveals one of the main teachings of the text, namely the importance of learning. Again, an extremely down-to-earth topic. It reads, "The master said, quote, 'Is it not a pleasure to learn and, when it is timely, to practice what you have learned?'" Confucius saw every interaction as an opportunity to learn. The master said, "When you meet a worthy person, think, how could you become his equal? And when you meet an unworthy person, turn inward and examine your own conduct." Confucius also encouraged his students to listen to constructive criticism. And he also allowed them to correct his own mistakes. In fact, he said, "I've been fortunate. If I make a mistake, others will be sure to let me know." And he even called out students when they accepted his teachings without any critical thought. We read, "The master said, 'Yan Wei is no help to me. He is pleased with everything I say.'" Confucius also often repeated that even he still had much to learn. The master said, "I'm able to work as hard as anyone, but as for being a junzi, that is a noble man, in practice and conduct, I have not gotten there yet." And the master said, "I dare not call myself a sage. What should instead be said of me is that I work towards it without ever feeling sated, and that I am never tired of teaching." And when one of his disciples claimed he wasn't ready for a government position, Confucius was delighted, as this was just the kind of self-awareness, self-criticism that will make a good ruler. We read, "The master encouraged Chidiao Kai to take office. Chidiao Kai replied, 'I'm not confident, I'm ready to take this step.' And then the master was pleased." The main goal of Confucius' teaching was to become a nobleman or a junzi, literally meaning the son of a prince. Before his time, the word had been reserved for aristocrats, but Confucius applied the term to anyone who had achieved a high level of moral and intellectual cultivation. Through hard work, he claimed, anyone could become a junzi. And Confucius practiced as he preached, for he had both rich and poor disciples, ranging from aristocrats to the sons of criminals. Very importantly, we read, "The master said, 'In teaching there should be no distinction of the classes,' one of the essential lines of the Analects. According to Confucius, a person can become a junzi through both education and the cultivation of virtues. Let's start with education. To get the right people in power, Confucius advised officials to invest time in an educational curriculum based on history, ethics, politics, poetry, art, and music. A bit similar to the humanists in Renaissance Florence, Confucius believed that this education would create knowledgeable, moral, and socially engaged citizens who would bring peace to the land. Later generations after Confucius would believe that Confucius had either written or edited the so-called 5 classics, the Book of Changes, the Book of Documents, the Book of Odes, the Book of Rites, and the Spring and Autumn Annals, to give people a good education. But modern textual analysis has revealed that these texts were created independently of Confucius. Now let's discuss the virtues necessary for becoming a junzi. According to Confucius, a junzi distinguished himself by cultivating a number of virtues. And the greatest of these virtues was ren. And this literally means to man, signifying kindness between people. So what is this ren? We read, "Duan Gong asked about ren. The master said, 'When abroad, conduct yourself as though you were receiving an honored guest. And when employing the people in your state, deport yourself as if you have been put in charge of a grand sacrifice.'" And then he added an early variant of the so-called Golden Rule. He said, "Do not impose on others what you do not desire for yourself." And about this we also read, "Zigong asked, 'Is there a single word that can serve as a guide to conduct throughout life?' The master said, 'It is perhaps the word shu or reciprocity. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not want others to impose on you.'" To Confucius, ren was so important that it trumped even obeying your parents, teachers, or superiors. He wrote, "When encountering matters that involve ren, do not yield even to your teacher." Another important Confucian virtue is qi, meaning wisdom, which is actively acquired through learning. Associated virtues are yi or righteousness, which refers to doing what is morally right, and jung, meaning courage, referring to the ability to actually do what is right, no matter how high the stakes. And this would stay a main Confucian virtue for centuries to come. These virtues, Confucius claimed, are of course important also in good times, but they are most apparent in tough times. The master said, "Only in the deepest of winter, meaning the toughest times, do we realize that the pine and the cypress, meaning the junzi, are the last to shed their leaves." Another important Confucian virtue is li, meaning ritual. Being a conservative man, Confucius believed that the traditions of the past could help solve the instability of his day. As a result, we sometimes find Confucius preoccupied with seemingly trivial ritualistic details, like when or where to bow during a ceremony or what material ceremonial garbs should be made of. According to Confucius, those rituals with their music and poetry could awaken in people a deep moral understanding, which would in turn restore social harmony. And that is why he said, discipline yourself and turn to Li. This leads to Ren, to kindness. Yet, according to Confucius, the performance of those rituals in his day was in a state of decay. In one instance we read, he considered the performance of a ritual so corrupted that he would rather not attend. To the modern reader, these issues might seem trivial, yet Confucius correctly understood the power of ritual to knit a society together. On top of this, Confucius also broadened the term Li to mean, besides ritual, also just proper conduct, manners, and also the respect for social norms and traditions. Finally, we have to mention the virtue Shao, or filial piety, meaning the respectful treatment of parents, elders, and ancestors. And he called for people to selflessly perform their roles in both society and their families. However, Confucius also stressed that obeying parents or superiors had its limits. He advised to gently dissuade them in case they engaged in wrongdoing. Let's now end with the implications of Confucius's virtue ethics on government. Confucius was convinced that a government led by junzi would restore order in China, especially since they would be great role models for their subjects. The junzi, he claimed, would lead by example. We read, "If those above, meaning those in charge, love righteousness, then none of the common people will dare to be disobedient." We read that when a king complained about the number of thieves in his state, Confucius countered that a junzi leader had such a positive effect on his subjects that, quote, "even if you were to offer rewards for stealing, people would not do it." Although he did claim that junzi probably had to be in office for 100 years for these positive effects to fully show. Confucius also famously advised rulers to select ministers and other bureaucrats based not on family ties, but on their merit and virtue. He said, "Assign your staff to the right positions, try to overlook minor shortcomings, and the most important part, and promote those of outstanding talent. Talent is more important than birth." This method, Confucius claimed, had also been practiced by the legendary Emperor Shun, who made the commoner Gao Yao minister of law. We read, "After Shun had gained possession of the empire, he searched among the multitude for someone of worth, and then he raised Gao Yao to a position at the top. And because he did so, those who were without Ren stayed away." And Confucius also quotes King Wu, the first king of Zhou, who had done the same thing when picking his officials. He wrote, "Even though I have my relatives, it is better to employ humane men." Confucius's most important follower, Mengzi of the 4th century BC, better known as Mencius in the West, also stressed this concept. He claimed that rulers had to rule for the benefit of the people, or otherwise they should be removed. When a king asked Mencius if his ministers should be able to depose even him, he bluntly repeated this view. We read, "If the prince made serious mistakes, they should criticize him. But if repeated criticisms fall on deaf ears, they should depose him." The king was shocked by the response. But then Mencius said, "Your Majesty, you should not be surprised by my answer. Since you asked me, I dared not give you anything but a proper answer." What a daring statement to a man of such power as the emperor himself. Confucius' ideal caught on during the Han Dynasty, which started around 200 BC, and made Confucianism the official philosophy of the state. From the very start of the Han Dynasty, emperors sought junzi for government positions. Liu Bang, the first emperor of Han, already issued an historic edict in 196 BC, which stated that local officials had to seek out talented men in their districts and send them to the capital. We read, "If any among the people have an excellent reputation and manifest virtue, the officials must personally urge them to come, provide them with chariots and horses, and send them to the courts of the Chancellor of State to have written down their accomplishments, their appearance, and their age." Emperor Wen continued the practice of finding men of merit to populate the ever-growing bureaucracy of China, which at its peak, by the way, governed 50 million people. In 165 BC, Emperor Wen ordered his officials to, quote, "select men of excellence and integrity and subject them to imperial examinations." Emperor Wu took the next step by making Confucianism the official philosophy of the state, and he also tested examinees on their knowledge of the Confucian classics. And in 124 BC, Emperor Wu established the Imperial Academy, which by the end of the Han Dynasty enrolled more than 30,000 students at one time. Over the centuries, the imperial examination system continued to expand, and in time even commoners were allowed to take the test, allowing for some social mobility. For instance, we read that Ni Kuan first had to work as a manual laborer to pay for his education, quote, "carrying a copy of the classics with him as he hoed," and he eventually worked himself up all the way to imperial counselor. Today, the idea of meritocracy, combined with examinations, seems common sense. But it was a true innovation at the time. The Europeans only adopted an explicitly meritocratic system in the British East India Company in the early 17th century. In India, British company managers would hire and promote employees based on examinations in order to prevent corruption and favoritism. And via the East India Company, the idea spread through the Western world, where various great thinkers such as Voltaire came to endorse it. Also in the 17th century, Prussia, under Frederick William, also installed a competitive system to pick civil servants. And this model spread to France a century later and became widespread in Europe only in the 19th century. And thus unfolded the teachings of Confucius, the greatest of the Chinese sages. Thanks for listening. And if you want to know more about Confucius, Chinese history, or many of the other topics from world history, read my book, In Search of the Sublime. You can read it for free on worldhistorybook.com, or you can buy a physical copy on Amazon. See you next time. Bye bye.